wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would firstly, before we start anything else, point out that our session is recorded and we will be posting this on YouTube. Tonight, mashallah, of Ramadan. We have reached the 22nd night of Ramadan. I would like to congratulate everybody for doing this, and I would like to pray to Allah that if we have not yet been forgiven, that He forgives us in the remaining nights. And inshallah, we have had 2 nights of Qadr, and we have one more coming up tomorrow night. Inshallah, please keep us all in your prayers, and inshallah, God will not only forgive us but also inspire us to become better human beings. Our discussion tonight is relating to culture and religion and where the line on the same is. So I would first want to define culture from the Oxford Dictionary, of course. Culture is the ideas, customs, social behavior of a particular people or society, while a religion is a system of a faith. So culture would go very, very wide in this sense, at least the way I understand, is that it goes from neutral things like Hazrat Abbas Ladu to Imam Hussein nu Montar to some very good things like Imam Jafar as-Sadiq nu Khirpuri, and also come to what I would say frankly ugly things like honor killings and oppression of women. To further elaborate on these aspects, we have with us Shk Kazim Bhojani, who I'll give you a small introduction of his. He was born and raised in India. He moved to Qom for Hausa studies and has been there studying there for around 11 years. He's finished his master's studies. And he has started Dars Kharij last year, and he's currently focusing on fiqh and usul, which is of course jurisprudence and principles of jurisprudence. He's also involved with the Babul Riza Institute, and he's also an organizer for the Babul Riza intensive short courses. Sheikh, I would like to welcome you to our show. I hope you're doing all well, and yeah, you can take over, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm assuming that I should start the discussion, and then inshallah I'll present something, and then we can have a bit of the time for discussion, question and answers. Of course, you can keep typing in the chat if there's something very important. You want to say something like, what's the meaning of craziness in Arabic? And the right answer is Junoon. So, so if you have something important to say in between the discussion, you can keep typing. So I'll be looking at the chat as well. Okay, so let me begin. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So as the brother said, this is the night of the 22nd of the month of Ramadan. We are passing through these very important nights, nights which contain the Layali ul Qadr. These are very special nights, especially the nights which pass. They're also attributed to Amirul Mu'mineen. These are the days and nights of his martyrdom, and we remember him. And inshallah, we hope that we spend these nights in a manner that gives us most benefit. And inshallah, the last and the most important of the Layali ul Qadr is coming. So according to the riwayat that we have, 23rd night, which will be tomorrow night, will be the last Laylatul Qadr and the most important of the 3. So inshallah, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we all get the tawfiq, opportunity to spend that night in worship and get the best of destinies written for us for the next coming year. Okay, so let me begin my discussion. So what I'm also going to do is I'm sharing my screen so I can show some things that are typed on the computer as well. So I think that will help you keep the focus. So I'm beginning my discussion. Okay, there's a, when I started preparing for it, this is such a vast, big topic and so many aspects and dimensions are there. So it was very slightly difficult to choose exactly what things to present. So I also tried to get an idea of what the organizers had in mind. And of course, there's some things I had in mind as well regarding this topic. So I've tried to strike a balance between the two. So let me begin. Let me see how much I can cover. So I'll try to cover the important aspects of these, the topic that we have. And let's see how it goes, and then I'll take your questions as well. Okay, so this discussion, so I've you can see on the screen, I've just named it culture and religion through the lens of Islam. And where do we draw the line? What do these things mean for us? What's the relationship between them? And how do you practically strike the right balance between these two things? Okay, this is a very important discussion, and I was happy that I was given this topic to speak about because we don't discuss these kinds of topics often, and it's something good to discuss and talk and see what different ideas are out there. It's an important discussion, of course. We all know why, because both culture and religion, they affect our lives. I mean, we by default have a religion, which is the religion of Islam. So we are born as Muslims. Of course, we also say that this is the right religion. Okay. For now, I'm going to keep that discussion. I'm not going to enter into that. But we have a religion. So we are Muslims, followers of the school of Ahlul Bayt. So a certain reading of Islam, if you would like to call that. And we also have a culture which is a mix of, you can call it whatever you want to call it, Khoja culture, Indian culture, Indic culture, culture which is coming from India, Indo-African culture for many of you who are in Dar es Salaam. Why? Because when this Indian culture came to Africa, the certain elements were modified. So we all have a culture. Most people in this world who are living, they have a specific culture. Okay, some cultures are stronger, some cultures are weaker, but we all have a culture. Okay, so before we begin the discussion, let's define, and Brother Sakalain, he defined culture from Oxford Dictionary. So I also did the same thing. I searched online. I just tried to look for a definition of culture. It's self-explanatory. We don't need to like define it because we all know what it means. So as Brother Sakalain also said, it's a set of different things related to language, food, clothing, family, and social norms. So these are those outer aspects of culture which stand out. But culture also has some hidden aspects like thinking patterns, attitudes, approaches. How do we go about doing a certain thing? Different cultures are different when it comes to these thinking patterns and attitudes. So here's a small diagram that shows you different things that are there in culture. You know most of these things. So language, values, food and drink, arts, tools and object, techniques and skills. It's a whole package that makes up a certain culture. The simplest example is our own cultures. For example, the Khoja culture, or whatever name you want to give it, Indian culture, Khoja culture. It has its own language. So originally Gujarati, Kutchi. Nowadays it's been changing. It's between Gujarati, English, Kutchi. It's a mix right now. Certain way of eating food. For example, in iftar, we have certain ways of making food. Clothing, we like to wear certain type of clothing. Family and social norms, very, very important. We have certain ways our families and social norms work. And the hidden part is also there, which is part of culture, our thinking patterns or attitudes. So for example, the Khoja community or the Indian community has a specific economic attitude, the way they approach their economic organization and how they go about managing their economic life. It's driven by a set of attitudes which we have actually taken from Indian culture. Okay, I mean, if I get a chance later, I'll allude to that how this comes, and it's a bit different from the African culture and how they would approach economic matters. So this is behind the curtains, these attitudes. And we see around the world, different cultures exist. Okay, it's a very multicultural world out there. Maybe you can, I don't know, if you want to put them into big units, you might say that the world is dominated by like 7, 8, 10, 15 mega cultures, which are roughly defined by boundaries. And then inside each culture, you have a variety, maybe hundreds of subcultures. So for example, the culture of Indian subcontinent, you can define it as one mega culture. And then inside that, you have multiple variations which define those subcultures. So we fall in that big category of the Indian culture because that's where we come from. And a lot of the elements in our culture are defined from where we come from. Of course, the local variations are also there. So, for example, Khoja African culture is going to vary slightly from even the Khoja Indian culture, which is going to vary slightly from Khoja Pakistani cultures, although they'll all share some common elements because of their being Khoja, because of their being coming from a specific ethnic group from India. So we all know this, or we should know this, that we come from a certain caste in India. India is, even till today, dominated by caste system. It's a way of social organization that exists. Of course, I don't want to go into that discussion. Why does it exist, and is it good, is it bad, is it oppressive? But as a reality, we came from a certain caste. So before we became Muslims, we were Lohanas. It's a name of a caste in India that still exists today. So it's one of those upper caste groups that we separated and we became Muslims, and then later we became Ismailis and then Shias. It's a long story. So different cultures exist for a variety of reasons. Again, tracing the history of different cultures is a topic in itself. There are geographical reasons, there are historical reasons, what people did in the past. There's role of religion in shaping cultures. So we know that different cultures exist. So our discussion today is going to be, I'm trying to focus on, because so many questions that you can ask generally about religion and culture. But that's going to become a very wide discussion, talking about different religions and different cultures. Basically, I'm going to narrow down and just focus on Islam and culture. What's the relationship? So I'm going to focus on one religion, and I've done this for religion in general, but because just to keep our focus, I just want to look at what's the relationship between Islam and culture, because that's our topic. That is there a line between these two? What do these things mean for us? And what's the relationship? And then I'm going to talk about how it relates to us today, because we also have a specific culture in which we live. Okay? Most of you come from a same culture. I'm assuming that most of my participants are from East Africa, Dar es Salaam, around that area. Okay, so this was a brief introduction. I had to give this introduction so the tone is set. There's a lot that I have to cover, and I'm not even sure I'm going to complete the whole thing, but I have two parts that I want to discuss. At least the first part I'll cover, and then I would like to take your views about what do you think about what I have presented, and then we can see how to take it. So fasten your seatbelts. It might be a slightly technical. I don't know how it will be, but inshallah, it's a good opportunity for us to get into these a bit technical discussions where we are analyzing these things. So these are areas of studies that span across different areas. So part of it is to do with sociology, understanding societies. A part of it is to do with civilization studies. So these are all topics that are out there. So it's a thing that's coming from so many different things. We're trying to see what's the relationship of Islam with this. So this is my question that I want to ask and try to answer. The question is, what is the relationship between Islam and different cultures that exist? And I'll narrow it down to our own culture as well. The answer to that is that Islam is okay, I'm going to use some words that might sound strange, and I did it on purpose because I wanted them to sound strange, because so we think about them. So Islam is kind of a super culture. Okay, that's a nice name to use, super culture, right? You're used to Superman and superpower, so super culture. Or you want to use another word if you like, mathematics and other kind of things, which I like. So they use, so Islam is kind of a meta culture. Okay, so what does it mean? Okay, let me explain this, and this is going to be the most important part of my discussion, and inshallah this should clarify a lot of the things that are going to come later. So Islam is not a culture that has come to replace and do away with other cultures. So some people might think that, look, Islam is a culture in itself, which has all those cultural elements. It has language of its own, it has mannerisms of its own, it has art of its own. And then Islam has come, the final religion, and it wants to remove all the cultures, wipe them out, completely destroy them, and replace the existing cultures with this one single universal culture. That's not what Islam is. Okay, so Islam is not a specific culture that wants to replace other cultures. Okay, so this is on one side, that Islam is not a culture. On the other side, it's not even indifferent to the state of cultures. So this is a very interesting point, that neither is Islam a culture, a fixed way of living, nor it says that I don't care whichever culture you have, it doesn't matter. I'm indifferent to whatever culture you have. So it doesn't matter, you have the pagan Arab culture which existed before the Holy Prophet came, or Persian culture, or the Western culture, or the Indian culture, it doesn't matter. All the cultures are same for me, and you just be good at your heart and you just believe in Allah, and that's it. So that's even not the case. So there are two knots I'm using to define what Islam is. So what it means is that, okay, and again, this is another funny term, not so funny, but there's another a novel term that I came up because I was preparing for it. So I said, let me do some new things. So if I want to say it, Islam would judge different cultures. So you'll have something called Islamicity scale. Okay, I couldn't find a better word. I tried different combinations, but it didn't just work. So what does it mean is that Islam would come and it would rate different cultures and give it a score from 0 to 100. So in view of Islam, all cultures are not the same. Some cultures are better, have a higher score, and I'll mention why. And some cultures, they have a lower score. They're not so good in the eyes of Islam, and Islam says that your score is very low. You need to work harder, you need to upgrade yourself and raise yourself culturally. So Islam doesn't say that Arab culture, Persian culture, Indian culture, get lost, go away. No, Islam comes and judges these cultures on a set of criteria, which I'm going to mention, and gives every culture a score. And then it comes and says that all the cultures, let them be there, but let them upgrade themselves. Let them become more refined and better. And therefore, I call Islam a meta culture. Okay, let me give you some examples. So, which cultures would score very low on this Islamicity scale? Okay, definitely the culture of Jahiliyyah. So, before the coming of the Prophet of Islam. So the pagan Arab society and the culture, it was a culture, right? They had a language, they had social interaction, they had family interaction, position of women in that society, that also is part of culture, as Brother Saklan mentioned in the beginning. There's so many things that come as part of culture. So when Islam came, it said that your score is very low on different cultural counters and different cultural score criteria. And then Islam came and the Holy Prophet came and it started raising that culture, improving its score. And which culture will get highest score? Okay, these are just examples. When the Imam of our time would come, what he's actually going to do is going to raise all cultures to their full potential. So even when Imam would come, he's not going to do away with all the different cultures. No, he's going to take different cultures and see what different potentials they have, and is going to raise their score to, inshallah, close to 100. So this is what Islam is. It's there to feed the cultures, to upgrade the cultures, to improve the culture. So it's a very special relationship. That's why I called it a super culture or a meta culture. So therefore, this discussion about culture is very important, that how close our society is to the ideal culture that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. Why culture is so important? Because it drives the society and people and their destiny. And this is how it is. We, without realizing, many portions of our lives come from our culture subconsciously. There's so many things that we inherit from the culture, the dominant culture in which we live. Okay, it can be anything. So if a person is raised in a heavily dominated Western culture is going to automatically be trained and brought up in that culture. So those kind of attitudes, and that affects his life choices, his actions, and eventually his destiny, where this person would end up. Okay, so my next question is, what I try to do is I try to define relationship between Islam and culture. And the answer to it is that Islam is kind of a cultural template. Again, I'm using strange and new words because I couldn't find better words for these kind of things. So Islam is a template. It gives you criteria. It gives you different ways of judging your culture and upgrading it. So I'm going to come to some concrete examples to make it more clear, and so inshallah it should be become more clear when I give some examples. So Islam gives you a template, okay, and says that, look, check if the culture in which you live, does it have this template, and how much it do you have? And if you have more elements of this criteria which Islam has defined, your culture is more better, it's superior. But there's an important point that I want to mention, and I'm going to highlight this part. And by the way, someone is scribbling on my screen. I don't know why. Okay. Is that a way of
No, we're not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a question. I'm just even having a look at the chat. Is there any particular culture that can be associated with Islam? So I'll come to that. I'll try to answer it more concretely in a short while. So let me go back. Okay. So let me give you an example. And this example is very important to understand relationship between Islam and culture. So the example I'm going to give is that of an operating system. Okay. So all of you know computers. All of you are genius, and you know how these different things work. So this example should be okay, and I'm sorry, no offense meant to the Mac OS. I'm just choosing Windows because I don't know, because I use Windows, so I'm giving example of Windows. So the example is very important. So when you buy a new computer, a brand new computer, it comes with a default operating system. Okay, so it's a default operating system, and the operating system also has its own softwares, right? So for example, when you get Windows is your operating system, and inside there are some softwares that Windows has installed. Of course, some of these softwares sometimes are junkware, so you can delete them as soon as you get the new laptop, but many of these softwares are useful. So when you get this Windows operating system, it's a template. It's default. It doesn't have anything in it. Just it has that platform Windows for you to use. And then there are a few softwares that are there. And now what you can do is you can customize to your own taste, right? So your computer can look completely different, your operating system and your computer, to another person's computer. Why? Because you'll install softwares of your own choice. For example, some people prefer Firefox as a browser, while some people hate Firefox, they like Chrome. And some people hate both Firefox and Chrome, and they like Edge, which is something which I don't like. It's too heavy, it's too slow, and it's a Windows, so it's not. Okay, so look at this example. So this operating system is Islam. Okay, I'm just giving an example. So it gives you a default set of options, and it has its own cultural elements. So I'm not trying to say that Islam doesn't have any fixed cultural elements. No, it has. But it's flexible to so many other combinations of cultures as long as you're within that operating system. So if you install Firefox, Windows is going to work fine. If you install Chrome, it's going to work fine. If you just decide to go by Edge, which is the default browser, you are all fine. So Islam is that base culture, that template, that empty thing in which you can put different cultures, as long as it's not virus, as long as it's not something which the operating system is going to reject. So you can install any software you want as long as it doesn't go outside the Windows security regulations. So you have Windows Defender. If you try to install a virus which doesn't fit with the operating system is going to respond and react. It's going to try and stop you. So the same thing happens for Islam. Islam says that, look, I am there, I am your base, I am your operating system. I have some fixed elements. So for example, one of the fixed elements of Islam is that it says that when you greet each other, you should use the Arabic phrase, Salamun alaikum. It's something which Islam emphasizes, right? It's a fixed element in a specific language. Of course, prohibit uh, Islam doesn't prohibit greetings in other languages. No, it says not you can greet in other languages, but it says that this is preferred mode of greeting according to my template that I'm giving. But you can modify it in different cultures. Islam gives you that flexibility to design your operating system and computer in any way you like, as long as you are within that framework. So Islam is the same. But according to Windows guidelines, maybe one of these three browsers is better. It can happen. So it happens that sometimes you have 10 different softwares to do one thing. Windows recommends that this particular software is more in line with my capabilities. So the same thing is going to happen for different cultures as well. Islam is saying that all the cultures are good and acceptable, of course, as long as they are within those red lines of Islam. Otherwise, Islam would reject. So if there is a haram element in a certain culture, for example, there's some cultures where drinking alcohol is very normal. It's part of the culture. It's very accepted. It's understood. Islam is going to say that, no, no, no. If you want to come in my framework, I don't accept this element of your culture. But if you remove that, and if you have a sound culture, which is sound according to Islam, then you can have different variations. Islam is fine with different variations that are there. And why is that the case? Why? Because Islam has come to guide the entire humanity. Islam is not for a particular race or a particular group or a particular tribe or a particular culture. No, Islam has come to guide the human society, and human societies are bound to a certain culture. Every society is driven by a certain culture. So Islam doesn't say remove all the cultures. No, Islam says that whatever culture you have, if you are within the framework I have defined, then you fall in that bigger umbrella of Islamic culture. So, conclusion to this part of my discussion is that Islam came to heavily influence and transform different cultures. So if different cultures are willing to amend and change as required by Islam and improve themselves, then Islam says that I'll show you ways of becoming better. So Islam has come to raise different cultures to higher standards that Islam defines, both in material sense and spiritual sense. Let me give you one or two small examples here, concrete examples, and then I'll stop. There's part two to my discussion, which I can continue, but I'll have to see that what's your thoughts on the discussion that we have so far. So, for example, this is a very simple example. You all must have read history. So compare the Arab culture, the pagan version of it, which is before Islam, and the same Arab culture with so many elements that were intact after Islam. You'll see that the score has gone up considerably. And that's why the Holy Prophet came, right? So he raised the pagan Arabic culture. Look, the Holy Prophet didn't come and destroy the Arab culture and say that it's all rubbish and nonsense and just do away with everything. No, he came and he said that let me look at those elements which are positive, those are strong. Let me retain those and let me do away with the negative elements there in Arab culture. I mean, example, the position of women in the pagan society. You see that it was really, really appalling and it was really like terrible. Okay, young women being buried, the young children, the female children would be buried alive. No rights for the woman, right to own, right to choose spouse, nothing was there. I mean, the woman was treated like a commodity by the men. And that unfortunately was the state of the pagan Arab society and also many societies of that time. So Islam comes and says that no, 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 this is not acceptable. This is a low culture. This is a negative part of this culture. I need to change it. So Islam came and it changed this portion and took it to another level where you have a more refined version of the same Arab culture, where, for example, the woman gained the rights which Islam wanted it to. The same thing holds true. I know there are questions that are going to come, so I'm going to stop after this to discuss some of the questions, and then let's see how discussion goes. So the same thing holds true for other cultures. For example, Persian culture. So when Islam came and Islam entered Persia, it did not do away with the Persian culture or Persian language and said that everyone stop speaking Persian and Farsi and start speaking Arabic and no other language will be tolerated. No. Islam came and enriched the Persian culture and I can say made it more Islamic. It gave it those elements which made it more valuable, and it removed those elements. At least it attempted to. Again, I'm not saying that Islam was 100% successful in transforming all these cultures. No, it was partially successful. The project which the Holy Prophet started was left unfinished for a variety of reasons, historical reasons, the different things that happened, but Islam had an impact on the different cultures. The Persian culture flourished with the entry of Islam. And interestingly, Shahid Mutahari has a book about this. It's called The Reciprocal Services of Iran and Islam. It's a very interesting book. It's translated in English as well. Inshallah, I'll share the link as well, where he discusses how Islam as a religion and a meta culture came and influenced the Iranian culture and how it enriched it. And then when the culture was enriched, the Persian culture, how the Persian culture came and revived Islam, because Islam was losing its true meaning in the Arab world because of the several historical reasons. You know what happened in that story. I hope you know. But so what happened was that this job of protecting Islam, preserving Islam, was now transferred from the Arab culture to the Persian culture. So a lot of the scholars, a lot of the books, a lot of the Islamic culture is developed in the Persian setting. Why? Because Islam came and enriched that culture. Same manner, of course, for each of these cultures, the story is different. How Islam entered India and Indian subcontinent and how much it was able to transform and how much it wasn't able to transform. South Asian cultures, Indonesia is majority Muslim. How did that happen? African culture, Islam entered Africa and how it interacted with different cultures. Each has its own story. Conclusion is that Islam looks at different cultures, at different molds, as different shaped containers, and says that doesn't matter which container you have. You have Indian culture, it's fine. You have South Asian culture, doesn't matter. African doesn't matter. Persian. Take this essence of Islam and pour it in this, your mold, whichever shape you like, and that's fine for me. I'll end this part of my discussion with one concrete example, very specific, make this idea clear what I was trying to say. So, for example, Islam says that one of the teachings of Islam is that you should honor your guests. So, honoring a guest is very, very important in Islam. The number of riwayat that we have, the respect that has to be given to the guest, how he should be treated in the house, what kind of food he should be served. We have so many guidelines about honoring the guest. But at the same time, Islam says that the guest should also be careful that he doesn't become a burden for the host. And unfortunately, this happens that someone goes to a person's house as a guest and then he just stays as a guest forever. Like, come, I mean, how many days are you going to stay? So we have riwayat which say that after 3 days, you're no longer a guest. Okay, that's finished. It's over. You can't get that special treatment forever. You can't be a burden on others. So Islam takes a balanced approach when it comes to, on one side, the host is asked to honor the guest, give him his best. It brings a lot of barakah and benefits. But it also tells the guest that, hope, don't be a burden on the host. Okay, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. I mean, how much you want to give him? He has family, his life. He can't be looking after you forever. Okay. So this is a template. This is a criteria that Islam has set. Now, different cultures adopt this idea differently. So each culture has a way of treating guests. And Islam says that look at my criteria, the criteria which I have given. More closer you are to my criteria, you are a better culture. And what's that criteria? You strike the right balance. So if you find a culture whereby there is this balance, that guests are very honoring when they hosts honor their guest nicely, but at the same time, the guests understand that I shouldn't be a burden. Let's say in a culture, this equilibrium is achieved, Islam will give it 100 score. Doesn't matter how you do it. Doesn't matter what you give this guest to eat. Do you give him biryani or do you give him, I don't know, kukupaka? Okay. You can give him, or I don't know, some other dish. Doesn't matter in what format different cultures honor their guests. In some cultures, honoring a guest means that you give them a place to sleep at night. Okay, that's fine. I mean, it's an accepted norm in that thing, it's fine. In some cultures, honoring the guest has different ways, like before they eat food, the host washes their hands. It's a way of showing respect and honor. Doesn't matter. Islam says it's fine. As long as you're abiding by that central criteria, that balance I have given, you're doing good. And then you can judge different cultures according to this. So, for example, if you see in our culture, the Khoja culture, if you see that, for example, the guests are not given so much importance, or people find it very burdening. I'm giving an example, inshallah, that's not the case. Then we should say, no, we should upgrade our culture and change it a bit to refine our culture and improve on this count. On the other hand, there are some cultures, and I know this, like sometimes in Iranian Persian culture, there's a lot of, you can say that they have a lot of ta'aruf. I don't know how to translate that word. They have a lot of, they don't say things so clearly. So sometimes it can lead to a guest becoming a burden. So someone comes to somebody's house as a guest. Now the host, bichara, feels shy to tell him, ke, oh, it's enough. Please go. I mean, they have this kind of extra ta'aruf and extra that layers whereby you don't say certain things. So that can transform into a negative thing for that culture. So they need to fix that element. They shouldn't be so shy in communicating and so careful that, oh, that person will feel bad, that it puts burden on them, burden on the family. So you can see different cultures can have different, they can stand at different points when it comes to the criteria which are defined for us. So, so I've spoken for quite a long time, and I can see there are many messages coming. So let me at least have a look at them. I'm sharing my screen, I can't see them. So this was part one of my discussion, and that's how, unfortunately, every time it becomes that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so I think I'll stop here. So I have presented part one of my discussion. Let me just mention what is the part two. So the second part of the discussion would be, or was, that then how do we, so we have a culture and we have a religion. Now, how do we strike that right balance? And so that's like the sensitive part of where I'll be talking about the Khoja culture, Khoja identity. Should we preserve the identity? Should we let go of it? What's that right balance? But the discussion I just had was there to set the stage, to put things in perspective as to what's the position of Islam as a religion, as the final religion, and what's the position of different cultures that are around the world. So I stop here. I'm just quickly reading the different comments that are there, and then we can have a discussion. We don't have much time remaining as well, so let's see where we can reach.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk, Sheikh. Mashallah, sir. The OS example it's really clarified the concept for me, that Islam gives the basic guideline, and then it's up to you now that you go on and work with your culture and try and fit your culture into the OS. And obviously, you can't make the OS fit into the application. The same way, you cannot force Islam to fit into your culture, and that your culture is the one that has to abide by Islam. And obviously, if you bring in bad applications, bad versions of your culture, you're creating a virus for the OS, for Islam, basically. And yeah, it really is a fantastic example. Thank you very much. Guys, we'll have a short Q&A, I think, now. We will begin with the question that we have on the chat.
Yeah. So
But guys, if you could please also, if you want to ask a question verbally, you can put up your hand, raise your hand on Zoom. There is a way to raise your hand on Zoom. You can just there's three dots there. If you click on them, and there's an option to raise your hand. If you're using it on a computer, there's another option right on the participants space where you can raise your hand. And inshallah, once Sheikh is done with the first question, we will come to you for your question, if as time allows, obviously. Thank you very much.
Okay. So yeah, I think I'll go through some of the questions quickly, which are there in the chat. So the first question was, is there any particular culture that can be associated with Islam? So I tried to define it very carefully. So again, because even the second question is related to the operating system example. The operating system example was just an example. Don't generalize everything in the example to Islam. Examples are there to explain a certain thing. Not everything that's there in example exactly fits the thing for which the example is there. So let me clarify. So is there a particular culture that can be associated with Islam? The answer is yes and no. What do I mean? See, Islam has certain cultural elements which are fixed, which Islam says that these are the best and these should be there. I give an example, like, or for example, a more stronger example is Islam says that you have to recite your salat in Arabic in this specific format. So this is a fixed cultural element. You can't change it. You can't say that even in the area, Islam is flexible and fluid. No. So Islam, like an operating system, will have some softwares which are permanent there. I mean, even if you see Windows, there are some elements of Windows that are there. You can't do anything with it. It's part of that operating system. You can't remove it. If you remove them, the Windows starts, I mean, it stops working. There are some essential processes in Windows that if you delete them, it stops working. In the same manner, Islam has certain fixed cultural elements, and Islam says that in these areas, you have to go by it. But outside those fixed specific elements, Islam doesn't define a single specific form. Okay, so that's one thing. Let me come to the second answer because it connects the second question, and that is that so there's this question: if Islam simply came to transform different cultures, is this not against what we say that Islam has answers to everything, that Islam has its own teaching in every aspect of life, it has its own view on everything, including every cultural aspect? This then wouldn't be a template, it would be a culture of its own. Okay, so I think the example which I gave might have misled a bit. So exactly what you said, I was trying to say. So yes, Islam has detailed teachings in every aspect of culture, but those teachings are not such that it only gives you one single way of applying that culture. So Islam has so what you said is completely right. Islam has answers to everything that's to do with human guidance, from economy, from politics, from social interactions, lifestyle, media. Islam has a comprehensive set of teachings. Okay. But these teachings doesn't mean that there is one single solidified fixed form of culture that come about because of these teachings. No, these teachings are so carefully put across to us, and they have that inherent flexibility that all these same teachings, which are very precise, they can be applied in different cultures. I gave the example of guests, right? That Islam has a very fixed teaching about how guest and host relationship should be. I gave a very specific example. Host should respect the guest in the highest manner, but the guest should also know that I shouldn't be a burden on them. So this is a very detailed teaching that Islam has in this aspect. Doesn't mean that when different cultures want to act on this teaching, they have to do it in a specific manner. No, Islam leaves that flexibility that you do according to your own culture. So I think the answer to the question would be that yes, what you have said is completely right, that Islam has teachings in every aspect. And that's what I was trying to say, that these teachings have that inherent flexibility that you can fit it in different cultures. But let me add this, sometimes some cultures, they are in a state that they don't match that Islamic criteria. So their Islam tells that culture that change yourself, upgrade yourself. And even this upgrading of a culture, Islam gives a flexibility. So for example, I mean, just giving example. So let's say in a certain culture, when guests come, they're only served like dry bread and I don't know what, curd, okay, which is not a good thing, right? When you have guests, you give them something good. Islam says that this is not a good thing that you're doing. Raise yourself. So what happened? Whatever is the best food in that culture should give that. So in Islam's view, if you give biryani to an Indian and kukupaka to an African and lasagna to an Italian, all these three would be equally valid applications of this general rule that respect your guests, give them the best of your foods. Okay, so it's a combination between detailed teachings and flexibility. And that's what makes Islam beautiful. That's what makes Islam even universal. That it can be applied from the time of the Holy Prophet to the Day of Judgment, and it can be applied across different cultures. So it gives you that flexibility. Of course, keep that in mind that it also has certain fixed cultural elements, and that are definitely there. But you can say a greater part is where Islam would allow that flexibility. Okay, so I think, yeah.
Yeah,
So before I
Sheikh,
go to new questions, if someone wants
yeah,
to ask, I don't know, you can decide how
yeah.
we can move
I
forward.
would, I think I would prefer now we go to at least one mic question, so somebody would explain their question. Yeah. Admin, if you could please unmute Ali Darsi to ask his question, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum.
So, Sheikh, it's mentioned in the riwayat that when Imam Zamana comes, there's going to be a sort of culture war. There's going to be clashing of the Muslim culture and the Western culture. Even nowadays, many other scholars, many ulama are also saying that we're now living in a new era of warfare called the cultural war. What's your opinion on this, and how can we maintain this so quote unquote Islamic culture in this era?
Okay, it's a very, very valid question, and it relates to our discussion. So the way I explained that, I mentioned this, right? That different cultures, when Islam wants to judge them, they get different scores. So I just said, for reference, like 0 to 100. So now what can happen is that if there is a culture that has a very low score, it's very further away from truth and what that ideal culture that Islam wants us to have, then what happens is that such a culture which is far away from that ideal Islamic culture, such a culture now resists change. It doesn't want to change. And the example is clear, right? In the time of the Holy Prophet, the pagan Arab culture and the leaders of that culture, not the regular people. So the people who were leading that culture at that time, the Abu Sufyans and the Abu Jahals and those in power and authority at that time, they didn't want the pagan Arab culture to change. Why? Because it's to their material loss. If they lose all their business, if the slaves become equal to free men, if the women now start getting rights, they lose out, they lose control. So what happens is that whenever Islam comes and says that, oh, certain culture, raise yourself, upgrade yourself, if that culture has gone a lot away from haqq and what Allah wants us to be, then the leaders of that culture, they react. They react and they resist any change. So you can apply that in today's setting, that if a culture of the world or the dominant culture, you can call it whatever you want, the Western culture, if it has strayed away from what Islam has defined in different areas, and as was mentioned, that in every single cultural area, Islam has detailed teachings. And you can judge a culture based on that. And you can see how much that culture has strayed away from the criteria Islam gives. So if you see today, and this can be a discussion that we can have, that in what counts and counters the Western culture has gone a lot away from the equilibrium Islam wants. The result is going to be that when Islam would say that this culture needs to change and improve, there's going to be resistance from that culture. Not only there's going to be resistance, that dominant culture is going to come and affect you. Okay, and some people have asked this question, said, yes, today we live in a world where the Western culture, loosely defining, again, the name is not important, you can call it the modern culture, the whatever you want to name it. I mean, the Western culture, the materialistic world, the humanist culture, the name is not important. Whatever it is, it's going to influence you. Why? Because dominant cultures automatically want to spread themselves and become more dominant. So yes, this idea of cultural war, of course, we need to define it properly, means that the dominant culture today, which on many counters has strayed away from that equilibrium and adl and balance that Islam mentions, is now affecting us and our societies and our cultures, and it wants to take us on their path, and which we believe is not the right path to take, straying away from the criteria which Islam has defined for us in different areas. So yes, this idea is there. Of course, it will need a separate topics, that what are the dimensions of this cultural war and how it comes to us through media, through social media, through internet, through computer games, through worse things like pornography, through other means, Hollywood. There are different ways in which this dominant culture, is the Western culture, is going to come and affect us. And we need to be careful, because I mentioned that Islam is that meta culture. We have our own culture, the Khoja culture, which also we need to know what it means and what are the different elements, and has it has it become non-existent? Has it weakened? Is it good to have it? Is it bad to have it? That's the second part of my discussion, which unfortunately I didn't reach. Like it happens to me in many of the sessions I have, because there's so much to speak and there's so little time. So I think that should answer the idea about the cultural war. Of course, it needs to be defined properly and seen properly, and we need to see that how do we protect ourselves from the negative influences of other cultures that come to us. So inshallah, it's a topic that has a lot of detail.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sheikh. Next question I think we'll take from Arif Okera, another mic question. Admin, if you can please help me with unmuting Arif.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So my question is two-parter. My first part of my question is Islam a culture, yes or no? And the second part is, and if it is a culture, how can it be a culture and a religion at the same time? Because culture has a different meaning and religion has a different meaning.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part again?
The second part is, and if it is a culture, how can it be a culture?
Sorry. Say it from the beginning, the first and the second. I missed that, the first part as well. Sorry.
Okay. Is Islam a culture or not? That's the first part. And the second part is, and if it is a culture, how can it be a culture and a religion at the same time? Because culture has a different definition and religion has a different definition.
Yeah. So I think the answer you have given partly in your question, and that is that, and I also tried to explain in the discussion that Islam is not a culture like one fixed set of doing things. Okay. But Islam is strongly connected to culture as well. So again, it can be different for different religions, and that's why I didn't into the topic of religion and culture, because that becomes so divergent. I mean, there are different religions. So I just wanted to talk about Islam. Islam, as we understand, a final revealed religion which has come for human guidance. It has certain fixed cultural elements. I'm not denying that, but it's not a full fixed solidified culture. It has solidified and fixed elements that wouldn't change till the day of judgment. The way we pray in Arabic, in those specific manner, is a fixed element of Islamic culture that doesn't change as we go across different cultures. Doesn't matter, you're a Khoja, you're an Indonesian, you are an Indian, you are a Bangladeshi, it doesn't matter. If you're a Muslim, you pray in this manner. And why do we have certain fixed cultural elements? That's a different story. I can talk about it, that why Allah has kept certain elements which are very fixed, like completely defined. There's a reason that these elements are there. But beyond these fixed cultural elements, Islam gives detailed teachings about how different cultures, where they should reach. It defines a criteria and sets a bar, says that you want to be a better culture, I'm telling you, rise up to this level. And then the way different cultures rise up to the same limit can be different. The ways and the paths, Islam has left flexibility, the examples I gave. So you're right in this sense that Islam is not a culture, because by definition, these two things are different. But it's a guiding force for culture. Sheikh Mutahari explains this as saying that Islam is something that goes inside a culture and tries to improve it. It's not there to destroy any culture. It's there to enrich cultures. The story is very, very interesting, especially when it comes to the interaction between Islam and the Persian culture. And I told you, Sayyid Mutahar has written a book about it. It's a very interesting book, that how Islam as a meta culture enters Persia and transforms the Persian culture, retaining many of the elements that were there. So Persian as a language still exists and is one of the very rich languages around the world today. And he explains that he has a whole chapter about how Islam contributed to development of Persian as a language. So Persian as a language flourished because of Islam. So this very strong relationship between Islam and cultures is there. Of course, it happens in a different manner in different settings. So Arab culture changed in a certain manner, Persian in a certain manner, Indian in a certain manner, Indonesian in a certain manner, and each has its story, and it's very interesting to go into some of these details. So I think
Thank
I've
you very
tried to
much.
answer
Yeah,
answer the
what a
question.
fantastic answer, Sheikh. Thank you very much. We will, guys. I just want to say that you will notice that we are slightly prioritizing mic questions. The reason being obviously that a mic question is more interactive, and we do want to keep this more. We don't just have it that Sheikh is the only one talking. Sheikh will also get tired. Yeah, we do want other people talking as well. We want more of a back and forth. Keep it more interactive, more attention, and hopefully be able to gain more out of the session as well. Admin, if you could please help me with unmuting Imran. I think he has a question as well. And guys, if you can ask your question on the mic, I will prefer that 10 times over, but we will come to your questions on text as well. But yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Okay, so I have a little bit of a controversial question, and apologies for it. According to your understanding, is it better that we stay within our cultures and practice religion, go to mosque within our maybe sects or communities, or is it advised to be like more open to the world and like connect with different cultures, and so sort of make one Islam rather than having different Islams, like different cultures under Islam, if that makes sense?
Okay, so it's a very, very important question, and it's not controversial. It's the question that I wanted to answer in the second part of the discussion, which I haven't been able to. So my second part of my discussion was exactly this: that what does Islam want from us in terms of the culture, especially that whether you like it or not, this is a reality that Khojas as a culture is a very kind of closed culture, especially in East Africa. Okay? So is that the desired state that Islam wants us to be in? So the answer, one line, of course, explanation will require a lot of time. It will need another session. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but this is what happens to me. So I'm on page 8. So I have like few pages of discussion, which actually goes into these, if you want to call them controversial issues. Of course, for me, they're not controversial. These are the issues that we should discuss. Otherwise, they just stay in the heart, in the minds of the youth. And then suddenly you have an explosion that, oh, no one was talking about it. And suddenly you see they show themselves in a certain form. So one line answer to that is that uh, Islam takes a balanced approach. Neither does it say that remove all the cultural identities and have just one single common culture where everyone is doing everything in the same manner. Neither does Islam say this, nor does Islam say this, that make yourself such a closed community whereby you're not interacting with others. So you have no shared goals with others. You don't have anything to go beyond your community. You're closed in that narrow framework of your own tribe, your own culture, your own people. It's none of the two. There is a third way which needs to be defined, which will take me time to define that, what exactly Islam wants, that, and how does it strike balance between having the cultural identity, but also having that flexibility and that ability to interact with other cultures. And there are examples in history where Islam successfully did this. And if I get time, not now, of course, and I don't even in future. In case if I get time, I would give those examples of how Islam successfully implemented its model of dealing with these cultural identities. It made a very successful model whereby neither the identities are completely destroyed, nor they become so rigid that people get divided. As the brother mentioned, that sometimes we get divided into our own boxes and our own versions of religion. It's none of the two. There is a balance, and that's the fine line between the Islam and culture. But again, I won't have time to go into the details, but because there are details that need to be mentioned, there are verses of the Quran. I had brought 2-3 verses of the Quran that talk about it. So if there would be chance, inshallah, some other time, we can go through it as well. Okay,
Yeah.
but this is a bad way of doing it, right? Like you do one session, you do it half, and then you say that if you want to continue, you have to come for another session. It's kind of marketing, though. Trying to
Yeah,
get
inshallah,
people to-
mashallah, Sheikh. Your marketing is on the level of Apple. Like the first part of the talk was so good that I think everybody would want to come back for the second talk.
So,
You've already killed it. Yeah.
yeah, if I
Um.
yeah go
Yeah,
on.
I think we'll take a couple more questions and then we'll close it for today. We will, inshallah, then we'll look into, I'll speak with the organizers and we'll look into maybe, inshallah, organizing a second session. We're not sure, obviously, of any of the logistics yet. So, but we will consider that for sure. Yeah, so we'll go to the next question from Zain Raza.
Yes.
Can we live in a culture which is not allowed in Islam, but not apply it in our life? I think what this refers to is the Western culture that you look at, that you're going out every night, you're going to really evil places, music, dance. You're living in that environment, or probably for studying reasons, right? Many of our youth are doing exactly just that. You're living in that environment, but you are trying your best to stay to your Islam. You are not going out clubbing. What is Islam's view on living in that environment? I'm guessing then a follow-up would be that what would be the recommended course of action, and when does it become haram to then live in that kind of environment?
Yeah. So generally speaking, living in a culture which is not allowed in Islam, again, let's make this a bit precise. So any culture you take, you can't say that it's 100% not allowed in Islam. Any culture will definitely have elements which are, Islam is fine with that. I mean, so even the Western culture, again, we'll need a discussion to see how much Western culture is away from Islam and which parts of it don't fit. But you won't find a single culture where 100% it's not allowed. So definitely you can live a culture, live in any culture, but expect this to happen, that if you are living in a culture which is which is quite far away from the criteria which Islam has set, know this, that applying the right thing in your life will be difficult. Why? Because you'll be going against the flow. So it's a natural consequence of living in a culture which is, let's say, strayed far away from what Islam wants that culture to be in. Okay? So if that's the case, you're going to find it difficult. So generally, the general answer to this would be, yes, it is allowed in Islam, but yes, the second part is important. You'll have to take care that you don't apply those negative or not allowed parts of their culture in your life. That's fine. And generally, you will find it difficult. Now, how do we approach life and different things in that culture? That will require a separate discussion. That not only we should be trying to protect ourselves from negative influence of that culture, we should be trying to enrich that culture. Why not think about at a small levels transforming that culture? Let's say in a Western country, in a Western culture, you're seeing that there are many things which are going wrong. So why not, in addition to protecting ourselves, take a proactive stance and try to fix that culture? And there are ways of doing it. So we shouldn't always be in the defensive, but we should also be in the offensive in trying to fix cultures which have problems with them. But of course, it's not one person's job. It needs collective effort. It's not that I can go as one person in a Western country and I see that this cultural element is completely skewed up and one person, I'm going to change it. No, it has to be a community group effort. People have to get together and see that, okay, we as a group, we can change this part of the element. One question which came as a side thing is that when does it become haram? Okay, so this would be a fiqhi question. And for such a thing, because it comes to the question of halal and haram boundaries, the best thing is to ask your specific question to your marja. I mean, because sometimes the questions have details that affect the answer. But generally speaking, what the maraje say is that if you're going to live in a culture where you have yaqeen that you're going to fall into haram, that means those red boundaries of Islam you won't be able to maintain, then if again there are other conditions that if you have other option. And so I'm not giving a fiqhi answer here because the fiqhi answers they are very specific. So if you have a very specific question, you can ask me separately, I'll get you the answer. But generally the criteria is this, that if you are living in a culture where you absolutely cannot practice Islam, which means you are definitely going to fall into haram, then it's problematic. Okay, I'm giving a bit I mean, this is
diplomatic
the way
answer.
you deal with questions. Don't give full
Yeah.
answers.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your Sheikh, your time today, Sheikh. I've just received some feedback from my team. Somebody's written, first time I attend for Shk Kazim, good choice and topic. So I think that's good credit to your OS example. I think I would say specifically.
Yeah, my marketing skills are bad.
Yeah. Yeah, Sheikh, thank you very much for your time today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for our discussion. I would just like to close our discussion today by, of course, blessing our discussion today by a recitation of the Holy Quran. I would just go for Surah Al-Fatiha, which I believe that it is about guiding us on the right path. So may Allah guide us on the right path as we make our journey through culture, as we try and navigate through culture and religion. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Okay, Sheikh, thank you very much for your time today. Inshallah, I will speak to the organizers and we will try and work out the logistics and we'll try and see if
I'm not insistent that we should definitely have a second session.
Yes.
If it's possible, then there's parts of discussion we can go into a bit more details. And some of the questions which we weren't able to answer, some of them are very important, relevant. Inshallah, if we get chance again, we might try and answer them. Inshallah.
Thank you very much for your time.
And keep us in your dua, especially tomorrow night is
Inshallah.
Keep us
Inshallah, Sheikh. Thank you very much.